Jesus said, "Man cannot live on bread alone, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." You're listening to Daily Truth.
Eschatology, for the record, as I said last week, is a point at which Christians, Orthodox, faithful Christians, can agree to disagree. That does not mean we are relativist. Someone is right and someone is wrong. So I'm not saying that all the positions are correct, but there is a difference between wrong doctrine and heretical doctrine. I'll say that again. There's a difference between wrong doctrine and heretical doctrine. There are plenty of doctrines which are wrong, but are not heresy. Therefore, we're not relativists. We're not saying everybody's right, and we should preach against such doctrines, but we should also be careful to define our terms. To say, I believe that this is wrong, and all wrong things that are not true ultimately have a harmful effect. But there are degrees of harmful effects. There is certain food that you can eat that ultimately, over the course of 30 years, will do you harm. And then there's food that's literally poisoned that will kill you in 15 minutes flat. There's a difference. There's a difference between unhealthy food that kills you over 30 years and literal poison that kills you in 15 minutes. And that's the difference between wrong doctrine and false doctrine. Things which are unbiblical and those things which are heresy proper. And when it comes to eschatology, if you are premillennial and believe that Christ will establish his kingdom cataclysmically, that is orthodox, and you are welcome in this church. However, regardless of how you see it, whether you're post-mill or pre-mill or all-mill, which is usually just a placeholder for someone who hasn't made up their mind, that's fine. We'll welcome you as well. Regardless of where you stand, we all believe that Christ wins. We all believe Christ wins. But there is still a distinction. And the distinction is not a moot point. It's not merely semantics. The distinction is theological, biblical, and it matters. We all believe that Christ wins, but the distinction is how. Does Christ win cataclysmically and suddenly and relatively soon, despite a weak yet surviving church? Or does Christ win over a long period of time, gradually and progressively, not despite a weak yet surviving church, but through an expanding and victorious church? That's the question. We all believe Jesus wins. To make it very, very succinct, we all believe Jesus wins. Some believe that Jesus will win despite the church. Some believe that Jesus will win through the church. I am of the latter persuasion. I believe that Jesus will win through the church. Not that he needs the church, but that he is designated and chosen in his grace and mercy, that his victory would be brought about through his people progressively and gradually throughout history. Real human history. So that, as 1 Corinthians 15 explicitly says, the last, not first, but rather last of his enemies to be defeated shall be death. Because why? Because progressively, systematically, one by one, through real human history and time, through the battering ram of the church, pushing back inch by inch the gates of hell which will not prevail, Christ has systematically, progressively defeated one by one all of his enemies so that they might be made a footstool for his feet, so that, as 1 Corinthians 15 says, the last of his enemies, not the first, but the last of his enemies to be defeated upon his physical final return would be death. Dispensationalism, if logically pursued, if the implications are logically drawn out, dispensationalism would deny this. It would insist that upon Christ's return, that death will be laid in its grave, that death will be defeated, and all other enemies will be defeated likewise. At worst, death will be defeated first, and then the other enemies as he establishes his earthly kingdom, in which place it would be the opposite of what Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 15, that death is defeated last, or at best, not straw manning, but steel manning the opponent's position. At best, you would have to believe that both death and every other enemy of Christ will be defeated simultaneously. But what you cannot hold is that death would be defeated last. That death would be defeated after a whole other group of enemies has already been defeated. And in that regard, I do not believe that the premillennial position is biblical. It is not heresy, but I do not believe that it is biblical.